For those who don't know me, I'm Steve Schwartz. I run the LSAT blog. I also host the LSAT Unplugged YouTube channel. Kat, you want to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. I'm Katrin Hessman-Schroll. I'm the Associate Dean for Admissions at Miami Law.
Yeah, thanks for joining me. So like I said before we started this, I'm not looking to have a standard discussion here, just covering the basic parts of the LSAT Flex or the law school application. I'm looking to go a little bit deeper, a little more off the cuff, and especially addressing all the recent changes, both on the LSAT side of things as well as the admissions side of things. So I know we recently had some changes with the August LSAT Flex policies. What's your take on the Flex in general?
I think it was an amazing response by the LSAC to pivot to provide this option under the circumstances. We're all experiencing a very uncertain time, and it was really hard on applicants not being able to take the exam in March and April, and LSAC's ability to really change and being, their entire format to be able to allow students to take it from home under the circumstances. I think it was a win for applicants, and we saw it in terms of the cycle, being able to still provide applicants an option to be able to test and provide that score as part of their application.
That's good to hear. So it sounds like you're pretty sympathetic to LSAC's position here, and that the LSAT Flex is considered equivalent to the regular LSAT, no differences at all.
I mean, it's a different exam under different circumstances. I think it was intended to provide students an option where there was no option. So this was the best option. And under the circumstances, I think they did an amazing job to roll out a full-on exam and allow students to take the test. And yes, there's obviously here and there, some students had different experiences, but in general, as it was reported, most students had a positive experience when it came to taking the LSAT Flex. Is it the same exam? No, it's not the same exam. It has a different format. It's proctored remotely. It only has 3 sections versus 5, although from applicants that have taken it, a lot of them have reported that they actually like it better to just have 3 sections. So to an extent, given the circumstances, I thought it was the best option available and the only option available for those that needed to take the LSAT.
So let's say that 3 years from now, COVID is no longer a concern. It's possible to administer it in person, back with the 5-section format. Presumably they would go back to the tablet, which they had recently switched to. Would you want to see a Flex, or would you want to see the 5-section exam, or would it not be a huge difference to you?
I think it wouldn't be a huge difference to me. I think if I learned anything under these circumstances is that providing flexibility and options for students going forward is very important to be more inclusive of everyone's situations or circumstances, no matter what. So I do think that providing more flexibility is what's needed. And this was an extreme circumstance, but as we move forward, I think we have all learned the importance of really being more flexible in the way that we approach the whole process.
Yeah, no, that's nice to see. So I'm guessing then that, as with every other law school I've heard about, any Flex results that somebody submits either now or in the future will be treated the same from an admissions perspective as the regular 5-section LSAT.
Correct. I mean, I think most admissions officers are, at least from what I've learned, have evaluated in the same way. And we have at this time no indication to look at it any different. I mean, it's only been provided twice, but at this time we don't really need to be looking at it differently. We understand the circumstances that students are going through. And if anything, I think from an admissions perspective, when we're evaluating candidate, we are living the circumstances with the students. So just having the option of actually taking a test and putting themselves through a test under unprecedented circumstances, I think is already, the best option available. So is it the best option long-term? I don't know. We'll see the numbers and analytics. I mean, to an extent, the in-person test has had many more years of data and testing. And the questions are no different for the LSAT Flex. The format is different. So we'll have to see over time how that fares in terms of reliability when it comes to bar passage and other factors that we consider in the admissions process.
Yeah, it's funny because I mean, I agree with you that a lot of students, they do prefer the three sections to the five. I hear that a lot as well. And I imagine that an at-home three-section exam, you're done in 2 hours, not having to go anywhere, no other test takers around, no distracting proctors other than the digital online proctor. It's generally a better experience. And so folks are lucky in that regard, but also they're the guinea pigs. They're the first ones who went through this simply by chance. And so it sounds like you're a bit understanding of the fact that paper and pencil was the default forever, really, in the whole history of standardized testing. Suddenly, last year with the digital, now with the flex, these students don't really have that same history to look back on or that same level of comfort. And to be fair, there have been some tech issues as to be expected with the first or couple of administrations in each format, which is normal. I think it went fairly well, all things considered. But if you're one of those few, unlucky few who has an issue, such as life. Now, with these folks, if they write an addendum, or should they write an addendum, if something goes terribly wrong, like there's an outage and it has to get canceled and they have to retake a month later, what's your view on that overall?
So generally, any major disruption of an exam is reported within, the LSAC structure already. And if students really feel that they need to submit an addendum, that's a school-specific question. I think schools treat addendums very differently and the need for them very differently. So that student would have to consult with the schools as to how they would like that to be broached. And it's a great question to ask and kind of get somebody within the admissions office of where they want to apply and learn a little bit more about their process on how they handle these outside factors in the evaluation process too.
Sure. And since we've got you here, I'm going to ask you directly about what you would recommend for applying to Miami law. And by the way, folks, feel free to ask questions in the chat at any point throughout this conversation, and I'll do what I can to work them in now or later. But Miami law on LSAT Flex tech issue addenda, what would you say?
For me, I think go ahead and add it. We want more information to an extent. I think that the faculty want to see and our committee want to see the entire picture of what was happening in the process. So included. That's kind of the standard answer for any issue that a student wants to address. The personal statement is not the place to do it. Any issue that you want to address, whether it's character, fitness, an issue with the test, or anything else that you want to address, that's what the addendum's for.
That's nice to hear. And I know that a lot of students do feel the need to explain if something goes wrong. Otherwise, you won't know. It'll just be like an asterisk or it'll be a cancellation. There's a brief note from LSAC, but sometimes things don't always get communicated. And there's been some miscommunication with ProctorU about what's allowed, what's not allowed. And so I think those kinks will resolve themselves with time, though. So hopefully there will be fewer of those as the cycle goes on.
Absolutely. I mean, everyone's having technical issues these days. And I do think that although some students may find the test the preferred way in terms of home, I think many students, especially those that don't have a situation at home where they have reliable internet or other pieces, this is not the best case scenario. This is just the only scenario currently available and safe under the current circumstances.
Yeah, everyone's just really doing the best they can with it. And LSAC has done a tremendous amount to make it more accessible. If anyone doesn't have a suitable home environment or not a good internet connection, not a good device, too much noise at
Absolutely.
home, they'll give you a credit to take it at a hotel. They'll reimburse you up to $125. So you get a home away from home for a night or so, and you get to take the LSAT in a quiet environment. So they've really gone above and beyond. I don't know how long they could maintain that for everybody who needs it. If this went on for years, there might need to be another solution. But for now, at least, I think that's fantastic.
Let's hope we're not under the current
Yes,
circumstances for
let's hope we don't need it. Yeah. So given that everyone's doing their best, I know that obviously those looking to start law school this fall are in a tough situation, not really knowing what's happening with schools being online or in person. I imagine that a lot of schools are still kind of figuring that out. I'm wondering what's happening at Miami Law in particular on that mix.
So at Miami, we're just trying our best in terms of being responsive to the students want, in terms of hybrid option, online option, and also working within the confinement of the social distance guidelines that are imposed in our city. And we are lucky that we have a university that has a health system and that has really taken a very holistic view on how we move forward with evaluating the best practices for our campus and for our students, and how we really interpret the safety guidelines when it comes to our campus. At Miami Law, we will have a hybrid model available for students who want to have the in-person instruction available, as with some online components, obviously, as well as an only online option. And that will really provide, again, the flexibility that students are looking for, to make sure that no matter how uncertain or anxious they feel at the beginning of the school year, they have at least control over which modality they want to take that first semester of law school. And we have invested a lot of time and resources to make sure that everyone's ready to go. I think this is probably one of the more, no offense to previous classes, but this is one of the most anticipated classes that we have had. And we probably had more go-arounds of preparing to welcome this class from every aspect than at least any class in my career.
So you're thinking a lot about these students' needs of this class in particular, because there are so many additional considerations, especially, as you said, the medical. You said you have an on-campus medical system of some kind.
Yeah, so we have a world-class health system in UHealth. That's part of the University of Miami system. And they have been instrumental in terms of guiding our plans of reopening the campus. And they have had a multidiscipline committee in place to really navigate all of the public health and government agency discussions in terms of setting up a plan in place that really is responsive to the students' needs, but also the safety and health of every person in our community.
Oh, wow. So I imagine that's one of the benefits of having that sort of economy of scale, being part of a larger university system. I imagine not every law school offers something like that.
No, I think that law schools have different setups, and ours certainly benefits from having such a strong university and specifically having UHealth as part of the university system.
And I'm also hearing a lot about flexibility here, the idea that students could maybe start off with some classes in person, but if they felt the need or desire to go online, they could do that fairly seamlessly without too much pushback or having to jump through too many hoops through that. Is that correct?
So it depends. So in terms of the beginning of the school year, we are asking students to make a choice whether they want to go online or in person, depending on their personal circumstances. And depending on that choice, they'll be assigned to a specific section. And once we are in school, there's certainly protocol addressing for any changes in specific circumstances. So if a student gets sick or something like that, there is a specific protocol to follow in that event. But students are making a choice in terms of which option they want, whether it's hybrid or online, for the fall semester.
Right. So they're getting the choice at the very beginning, at least.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
They can start regardless. Okay, that's fantastic.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
Now, for those who are applying this fall, as many of my students are, I'm wondering what you're seeing changing potentially in terms of the application. And you could speak about Miami Law in particular. I'm not expecting you to answer comprehensively for all 200 plus law schools. But when you look at what people are going to be submitting, there's, of course, the personal statement, diversity statement, addenda, character, fitness, and such. I'm wondering to what extent you might anticipate seeing a lot of COVID-focused personal statements, and what are some common pitfalls you may have seen already. I know that people haven't really submitted yet. Applications aren't even open, but what you might expect to see and what you might recommend against.
Absolutely. And we actually have already seen a handful of COVID-19 related personal statements
from the previous
since our
cycle.
application cycle didn't close pretty late. So to an extent, we have seen a handful of them. And I think, again, the topic is not as important as but how students present themselves and how they're using this topic in relation to the specific prompt of the essay. So our personal statement, we want you to tell us why you want to go to law school and why at Miami Law, and what really are you passionate about, and how is that related to what you want to do long-term in terms of your legal career. And if COVID-19 has something to do with it, then sure, it should be part of the essay. It shouldn't be the central part of the essay. And to an extent, we're all experiencing the same pandemic, but we are not all experiencing it in the same way. So to an extent, I would not tell students, don't write about COVID-19, but do be mindful that everyone is experiencing the pandemic too. So if you're going to, that's going to be a central focus, make sure it relates back to your legal education and why you want to be a lawyer, and how, you know, this experience may have impacted or exacerbated your need or want to go to law school. And I do think that that's something that students can focus on instead of just the pandemic itself. And for most students, they wanted to go to law school before the pandemic. The pandemic may have pushed them a little bit, but it's not the main reason. Some students, though, I could see how this situation has really prompted them to think about the legal implications of health crisis and the role of lawyers, and how that they want to be part of that, part of the change, part of the future.
Right, right. No, and I think that's a really important distinction. If folks can tie it back to previous experiences and show that although this is obviously a recent event in 2020 in particular, the actual root reason or desire to go to law school stems back earlier than that. So as long as they make that clear, then I think it's a more compelling application.
Absolutely.
And then the same, I would imagine, also goes for things related to Black Lives Matter and police brutality, which I'm seeing a lot of folks expressing a desire to write about as well.
Right. I mean, this, when it comes to, it goes back to, again, what is the role of law and what is the role of lawyers? And we also find ourselves at an inflection point in terms of the quest of racial justice and the persistent systemic racism that we have in this country. So another reason where we think this is an opportune time to study law. And this is really, to an extent, a double crisis going on in terms of the pandemic and the racial justice system. And what best time to come and study law, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Now, somewhat related to that a little bit, especially on the systemic racism side, this is a fairly difficult question I came across recently, so I'd love to get your take on this. So I was helping some students reviewing their personal statements, and a couple of these personal statements related to acts of racism and abuse that the authors of these statements had received from others over the course of their lives. And it involved profanity, specifically words like the N-word. And I'm wondering about students including the text of that word and similar profanity fully spelled out in a personal statement or in a diversity statement. I'm wondering if they should add asterisks or they should spell it out fully or do whatever feels right to them. Obviously, there's a human being on the other end of that statement to consider, and I'm wondering what seems most appropriate to you or if there is an answer on this.
So I think generally, when we talk about using informal language or, you know, to the extent of using profanity, our advice is that to not forget that this is your law school application that will be part of your career. This is, to an extent, part of your file forever. It will be forwarded to the bar exam when you are applying for bars. It will continue to forward later on, and it's permanent record. So whatever you are comfortable including in that record, that's what you should, you know, to an extent, include as part of your essay. I think that personally has been less than 1% of times where I have seen profanity be used in a statement that is effective to the extent that it adds value to your personal statement. But I may have more of a conservative view when it comes to using profanity in a professional school application.
I think that's a perfect answer. So you described broadly, what I'm taking away is that there may not be a right answer in all cases, but you gave your own personal take as well. And you are one individual reading applications at Miami Law. So that's something to consider. Yeah, no, thank you for that. I think that's an excellent answer, and folks need to do the soul searching to think about whether it's necessary or adds something or not. No, thank you for that. Had another question not recently come up about the resume in terms of how creative one can get. And if you're saying that you tend to take a more conservative line on it, I'm wondering about things, someone was asking about things like, can it be colorful?
In terms of?
Can it be literally colorful, I suppose? They were saying how like they are coming across resume templates on websites like Canva, and there's lots of creative things one can do, but I'm wondering again, is that appropriate for the law school application?
Absolutely. When I do a personal statement workshop, one of my test factors to see if it's a winning personal statement is, does it add value? And how does it add value to the more important questions in terms of your ability to perform as a student in law school, or your ability to be a good lawyer, about the skills that you bring to law school. And if the answer to those questions is all no, and there's obviously more questions to it, but then maybe it's not the best place in terms of using Canva, and it should be reserved for Instagram.
Right. Okay. Thanks for that. Yeah.
But
Canva's
again,
not...
I'm one person and there are a lot of different types of reviewers.
Right.
But generally, I think that I have not heard many admissions officers suggest that you should use any type of design as part of your personal statement.
No, and I believe also Google Docs has some resume templates as well that are probably a little more conservative.
Right.
No, thanks for that. Yeah. We had a question here in the chat from someone asking if it's okay to mention that you're an immigrant in your personal statement. I would imagine the answer is yes, but I'm hoping you can elaborate on that and maybe talk a little bit about diversity statement versus personal statement.
Yes. So I always tell students that ask questions about disclosing any type of information, whether it's immigration related or about their identity or about their political affiliation or religious affiliation or anything else that in my career, at least, students have had to ask the question, do you think I should disclose this about myself? That it's basically a personal choice about what you want the school to know. And to an extent, I always tell students, if you apply to a school about and include information about something that's so personal as to who you are and who you will be as a student and as an alumni, and that school uses that information against you, you don't want to be part of that school. So if immigration and being an immigrant is so tied to your identity and it's so important to you, like it was for me, I happened to be an immigrant, and it was very important to my law school experience and who I am as a person. I would certainly include it. It should not be precluded. I understand that immigrants have different things to think about, especially if you are a DACA student or an undocumented student. But again, when it comes to higher education, you want to be at an institution that is going to value you for your experience and for what you bring to the table. And not disclosing information that is so true to who you are becomes a problem down the road, because then you won't be welcome in that community and you won't feel at home as part of their alumni network. So that I actually think I would always vote for adding it. But it's very personal, and I would understand what a student may not want to disclose information like that.
Oh, thank you for that. And my understanding is that most law schools will tend to support students who are immigrants and students of a variety of cultural backgrounds. There might be a few that don't, but I think for the large part, most of them would. Is that your general take on things as well?
I think so, yes, but I can't speak for every admissions officer.
Of course, yeah.
And
yeah, there are 200 schools. I don't know of a comprehensive list of all of them and their policies, but yeah, generally, at least those we meet. So here's one about humor. What's the place of humor in a personal statement? When is it good? When is it not good? Where's the line?
I think that when it comes to personal statements, you're speaking to a very wide range of people, and humor is something that sometimes it doesn't land well. So if you're going to use humor, make sure it lands well with all kinds of different people. Otherwise, it may fall flat and may take away from your personal statement. So have I laughed with personal statements because they added humor to it? Sure. And it was probably more impactful because they got me to laugh when I was reading a lot of other applications. But that shouldn't be the intention of the statement to an extent. And also, they got me to laugh, but that they get the other voter or voters to laugh. So I think it's a dangerous strategy when you're dealing with very different types of people in the application process that review your application. If it's something kind of kooky or different in terms of how you approach humor, but again, does it add value to your personal statement? And what does it say about the type of lawyer you're going to be after 3 years of law school?
All right, thanks for that. We have another question here about soft factors that are highly valued in particular. And this person lists things like master's degrees, particular work experience, athletics, military experience. And I guess I would ask more targeted rather than from the perspective of after the fact, if someone is currently in college or they're a recent graduate, they're applying no sooner than 3 to 6 months from now, is there some soft factor that they could do in the short term within, let's say, 3 months to 2 years that might have a significant impact on the strength of their application?
Reviewing their application at length, and making sure that there's no typos. I feel like sounds simple, but the amount of applications that are put together kind of carelessly, and I think students forget that one of the most important skills as a lawyer is attention to detail. And to an extent, when students are not really giving the careful thought and their application's not really well thought out, and really we can't, when we're reading the application, we don't really get the sense that the student has thought about this decision long and hard like they should. It takes away from their application. Students often think of the application as different pieces, in terms of like, okay, personal statement check, resume check, other statements check. We don't look at the application in that way. We look at the application as how to do all of these pieces describe the student that you're going to be in our classroom, and how they're going to, how they inform our decision about what you bring in terms of your experience and background to the law school. So we're looking at it as a whole. So I think students really spending some time about what the essay in combination with resume and every other part of your application, what does it say about you as an applicant, and how you as an applicant maybe fit the profile to an extent that that particular law school is looking for. So spending more time there and making your applications be more prepared and well written, and really showing that you took the time and care to submit these pieces to an extent as part of the big picture of who you are as a student, is a worthy investment of time.
Well, it's interesting. I wasn't expecting that was exactly where you were going to go, because it sounds like what you're saying is rather than adding on more activities, it's to actually review the application and devote more attention to the process of putting together each part itself.
Yes. I mean, to an extent, I think that often students think that adding more to their volunteer section somehow is going to make them stand out. And having more honors is going to make them stand out, or having more. It's sometimes the less that transcends more in terms of the application. I mean, the things that we're impressed by are students that show that they're well-rounded, that they really have thought about their process, and they're really thoughtful about the law school process. And you don't get that by adding extra clubs, and you don't get that by, necessarily adding an extra honor or an extra scholarship to your resume. And we want people who are going to represent all kinds of different people at the end of this journey. I mean, the application process is kind of just like the beginning. And I think that most students look at it as with such finality, like, okay, I have to get this, and I have to do this, and I have to do the LSAT, and I have to, everything's a checklist. And then once they're admitted and they're kind of getting to law school, they're like, okay, now what? So I do think that thinking about it a little bit more past that, and why do we even have an application process, so that we can really evaluate students who are going to be lawyers 3 years from now. That's why the process is in there, and how do you fit that for that particular school.
And on that note, I'm going to add in also studying more for the LSAT. Biggest impact you can have on your admissions chances, as well as getting more scholarship money. So a few months devoted to that could have a massive impact. Now, I also want to ask you a little bit about scholarships and how LSAT scores and GPA relate to getting scholarship money from law schools. Could you share a little bit about the impact you see of a couple points more between a yes and a no, or between getting more scholarship money? How is that typically decided?
I don't think there's a typically decided when it comes to scholarships. I think scholarships is probably one of the biggest differences in the way that the scholarship review process among schools. We all want well-rounded students. We all want students that can academically succeed in law school. And the undergraduate GPA, the LSAT, the letters of recommendation, those three are all factors that basically are considered by most schools in terms of what goes to whether a student is academically fit to succeed in law school. So when looking at scholarships, we're also looking at those factors, and those are also the factors to an extent that gives us apples to apples comparison that are not the subjective factors. I think you get into the scholarship pool by having strong academic factors, but you get, depending on the schools, there's different variances about what happens next. And at Miami Law, certainly we want students to have strong academic credentials when we're reviewing scholarship applications, but what gets you from having a scholarship and not having a scholarship, there's everything else that comes into it. And whether you are someone who, and what you bring to the law school in terms of your experiences, and somebody who's well-rounded, and somebody who has all kinds of experiences, that those are all become factors in the scholarship selection process, aside from the academic factors. There's tons of students in the country that have, 158 or higher. So how do you differentiate among them? Okay, you can add the GPA. There's a ton of students that have like 3.4 or higher in the country. And I'm using kind of random measures in terms of the GPA. But to an extent, what happens next is that the evaluation process of the experience and what you bring to the table. And I think that's where there's the misunderstanding about what that means. Is it more things on the resume, more activities, more internships? No, we also understand, and I think that, again, I come from a different background. So as a first generation college and somebody who worked in college while going to college, I understand that sometimes you can't have all of the internships and all of the undergraduate activities in place because you have to work. And we get that. And I think there's a lot of admissions officers that are first generation college that understand that generally. And so that's where the whole idea of adding more to your resume doesn't really help you necessarily. Do we want students that are well-rounded? Sure. But again, that's not necessarily equate with more activities.
Yeah, and at the end, you're really polishing what you already have and aiming to present that in the best possible light, or retake the LSAT and get a few more points. And on that note, actually, some folks consider finishing out that semester to get a little more of a GPA boost. How do you feel about that?
It depends on which semester. I think that students, to an extent, if you can at the end, I don't see why you would do anything against it. I think it's odd and that students want to use their scholarship experience, which is probably one of the most amazing experiences of your life, both intellectually and personally, to get a GPA boost. There's so many interesting classes to take. Take what you're interested in. Yes, be conscious of the academic impact of your application. So I get it. And I get that you want to get that boost so that you end up in the best light possible when it comes to the application process. But at the same time, it is college. You are 21 or 20, at that time. Enjoy, explore your interests, take classes that are weird and different and that you get to read and you get to do different things. You may not get another shot. So in law school is a very different intellectual experience in college. So don't miss the opportunity just for a GPA boost.
Yeah, I suppose what I'm asking more is, should somebody delay their application slightly if they want to have more time to get more classes on the record?
If they think that's really going to be beneficial for their the school that they're applying to. I mean, maybe a little bit of a GPA boost will not really make that much of a difference. So that's good. It's quite a costly process to go about it. I would say if that's the plan, talk to the schools that you're intending to apply. I don't know that it always works in the way that the students intended, and I wouldn't want them to waste a whole semester. But then again, if you have the means and the financial support to be able to do it, yeah, I'm never in favor of doing something for an application process or for a resume. Maybe in that I'm a little bit naive in that you do something just for an application. And to get a boost. I think that the whole purpose is the experience, the well-rounded is part of the college experience. So If you want to stay an extra semester and take more fun classes and boost your GPA, sure. But
Yeah. Well, I
it's
guess
just, I think
spend
it's a
so much
life
time on
philosophy problem.
well, I spend so much time on the test prep side of things, which is all about boosting that number. So that's maybe
Yeah.
why I'm coming from this mentality. I get this question about grad school GPAs sometimes, and I got it in the chat here as well. The idea that could grad school GPAs help in some way, but my understanding is that they're not factored into the LSAC calculated GPA, which is what factors into the rankings. So I'm wondering, what role does a grad school GPA play in the admissions process, given that it may not have as much of a significant impact from rankings and ABA and all of that? But how do you view it?
So I think different law schools look at the graduate GPA differently, and it also depends on the student and their application. For example, a student where their undergraduate GPA wasn't very good, and years later they happen to have a graduate degree and they do really well, is a good way to show a law school that you grew in the process, and now you are able to take an academic experience and succeed in it. So it actually could be a very positive factor to support that you are academically ready to succeed in law school. In terms of, yes, it's not part of the cover sheet of the well, actually it is, but it's not the factor that is part of the ranking, sure, but we read pages 2, 3, and 4, and 5 of the Credential Assembly Report as well. And that has the graduate degree there, and it has the classes that you took. So depending on the process in place at that particular law school, it's actually considered in the review process the same way that we would evaluate a transcript. So I can't speak for other schools, but at Miami Law, when we evaluate an application, we look at the cover sheet that has the LSAC calculated GPA, but we also continue to read the rest of the application, and we look at the different courses and see that maybe you didn't do so well your freshman and college year in college because you were taking a lot of science courses because you wanted to be a doctor, and then you did third year, in senior year of college, now you're doing a little bit better. But then now the graduate degree shows that you actually did really well in courses where reading comprehension was kind of at the crux of the course. And it gives us more confidence that you have the academic ability to succeed to that extent. Do I encourage everyone to do a graduate degree before going to law school? No. I think that if you have it, great, and it can actually help in some cases, especially where there are questions about your academic abilities. But it's not necessarily a requirement or in any way something that I would suggest as to do as a first thing line of order in a gap year before coming to law school.
So again, it seems like it's more context, especially if it can show an upward trend or if there was a lot of time since the undergraduate GPA, maybe that would add some more context and some more background, even if it's not factoring into the calculations in a numeric sense.
Correct.
Okay, cool. We got a question here from Lewis, who it sounds like he did some digging and he was looking at the 509 reports. And he said that some students at Miami Law are said to have more than full tuition scholarship, but these scholarships are not mentioned on the website. So could that be a stipend? Could you speak to what that categorization might be if that is correct, in fact?
Yes. So we have a handful of scholarships that have a stipend attached to it. And if you Google scholarships at Miami Law, it will actually give you the whole breakdown of the scholarships that are stipends. They're there. They're just a little harder to find. But in the alternative, you can always email me, kschroll@law.miami.edu, and I can always send you the list directly.
Oh, nice. That's very cool. So I guess the next question is, how does one get one of those fantastic scholarships with the stipends?
So you are evaluated automatically through the process, and you basically will go through an interview if you're invited to do so by the admissions committee, or you can actually be awarded the scholarship itself. So it's just automatically part of the application process, and students are reviewed through it, and it's basically our highest level of merit-based scholarships.
So having a very compelling application and devoting a lot of time to perfecting it.
Correct.
Now, we got a question here from Kelsey asking about applying early in the cycle. So the idea of rolling admissions, how important is rolling admissions?
For this upcoming year or just generally?
I think this person's asking in a more general sense, but I'm sure folks would also be interested to hear about during the pandemic year.
Yes, absolutely. So I think generally, you are going to place yourself in the best position possible in the application process when you apply earlier in the cycle. We have at the beginning of a cycle, I think, more rosy colored glasses in terms of being able to, it's a new group of students. We don't have to measure you up against a whole pool of applicants. You're first. So we have fresh eyes. And yes, we read, 3,000 plus applications the cycle before, but when it comes to a new cycle, there is kind of we do have a break in terms of reading. So when we're reading your applications at the beginning, we are in a position to be able to really be kinder almost in the admission cycle, because we don't have anything to compare you by. When you apply in March or April, now you're being compared to a lot of admitted applicants already. So now it becomes tougher. And if you are being reviewed in May, it's likely that our funding for scholarships is already depleted, and that you are now vying for very few spots in the cycle. I think for this upcoming cycle, the 2021 cycle, I would say there's different theories out there about what's going to happen in terms of what we're predicting for the 2021 cycle. But I can tell you that just from personal experience in our applicant pool, there are a lot of applicants that wish they had everything ready to go for this application cycle. And for one reason or another, their application got delayed, but they had the whole summer to work on their application. That was supposed to be for the 2020 cycle, but now it's going to be for the 2021 cycle. So we expect a larger group of students being able to have all of their applications in earlier. So I do think that at least at Miami Law, we're anticipating more applicants applying earlier this upcoming cycle than later. So I do think rolling admissions will be a big factor in terms of your likelihood of being admitted this upcoming cycle versus previous cycle.
Thank you for that. Yeah, so get those applications in early. Now, one topic that's been coming up a lot for me among my students is the idea of personal statement versus diversity statement. What goes in one, what goes in the other? We had the question earlier about immigration status or being an immigrant. We had questions around racial and ethnic background. We have questions about medical and other major disabilities. How does one decide which statement to put them in? My take has always been, if you have a reason to write a diversity statement, you write it, and then you could use your personal statement for something else or a second thing, just to share more about oneself if the situation warrants. But what's your take?
Absolutely. So it depends on the school, because not all schools have diversity statements. Let's start with that. And they have other statements. So at Miami, we have a statement within the application. So it's a short statement about obstacles that you have overcome. So it's not necessarily a diversity statement. We have a very specific prompt. And I think that the diversity statement should be really, you need to look at the prompt of the school, because I think diversity means different things for different schools. And you want to make sure that you're not just writing a statement because you think you fit it. Make sure you read the prompt. I think some diversity statements are very specific about what they are looking for in that statement. And if you're unclear, then call and ask. Again, another good opportunity to call the office or send an email and ask, what are you looking for in a diversity statement if it's not already described on their website. Generally, I think that if I have worked at a school where a diversity statement was part of their application process, and we were looking for students who were, if you add diversity to the class and there was a pretty inclusive definition of what that meant for that particular school, then you could submit this statement if you met one of the factors included there, and if you felt that you added diversity to their particular class. So it was an open-ended statement to that extent, and it should be different than the personal statement. Now, on the other side of that, just because you're diverse, so I was once a Latina applicant, just because I feel that I'm a Latina applicant, I'm an immigrant, I'm a first generation college student, does not mean that I am in any way expected to submit it just because I fit the definition of diversity for some people from some schools. So to an extent, I also caution students, don't feel like you have to just because you are an underrepresented minority in law school. And if you are going to write a diversity statement, make sure that it's also thought about it in terms of the importance and how the attention to detail that you would spend on a personal statement. Because it goes back to my first advice, which is, does it add value to your application? And does it showcase you in a different light that will give the admissions officer reviewing your application a better sense of the type of student that you will be in our classroom?
Oh, thank you for that. Yeah. So it really depends on whether you actually have something to share that you want to talk about.
Absolutely.
Thank you for that. Well, I think we covered a lot of the questions I wanted to do a deeper dive on, but Kat, I really appreciate your taking the time here this evening. Do you want to share just again where folks can reach you for follow-ups or inquiring about applying to Miami Law?
Absolutely. So you can go straight to our website, www.law.miami.edu, and admissions is right at the top, and you can find me there, or you can email me directly at kschroll@law.miami.edu. And I'm always welcoming emails from students and setting up a time. These last couple of months have been, difficult in terms of accommodating all requests, but we've really tried our best to be available to students who really want to discuss the entire application process and where they are. There are so many admissions officers willing to help students navigate this process. I understand that this process is scary, and especially under the current circumstances, there are so many questions. That's what we're here for. We're ready to talk. I think this year is going to be difficult in terms of being able to meet people on the road. I don't know that on the road is a possibility this year for many of us that have restrictions to travel or unable to travel. So being available online is going to be how most of us become available to our prospective students who want to talk to us. And we're working really hard to make sure that the communication lines are open and that you are easily able to reach us and set up that one-on-one that we may have had at your local undergraduate. I know some undergraduate schools are looking to do virtual fairs, and the LSAC, you should be looking for information about the virtual fairs of the LSAC. Will be launching September, October, November, and it'll be a great way to have one-on-ones with admissions officers from all over the country.
Well, it's fantastic that you're so open to hearing from students. I'm sure that this year being such a unique year, there are lots of unique challenges and questions that come up, and your answer to many questions this evening was to reach out and ask. And it's great that you actually are willing to receive those questions personally as well. So I would definitely encourage folks to email you or to visit the website to find out the answers to these sorts of things and to reach out and apply sooner rather than later. So again, really appreciate your taking the time, and let's do this again sometime.
Absolutely.
Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I wish you all the best and take care.